Now, from the recent lowering of the pass mark and South Africa being ranked second worst in the world for mathematics, just as we head into the industrial 4.0 or the industrial to the statute debate, as well as the fees must fall protests, bringing to light a need for decolonising education, it appears that our education system is out of sync with the current state of society. But there are several theories as to how to go about transforming our education system. Some experts say that we need to first define what decolonising education really means. Others say that we need to decolonise the mind, while some suggest simply beginning with language will change the status quo. Joining us from our Cape Town studios is retired fellow of the University of Cape Town, Professor Tim Crowe. Now, he has over 40 years of experience in the academic field. Professor, very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning to you.
Decolonising education means different things to different people. What does the term mean to you, Professor?
Well, I see it as two sides of the same coin. Over centuries, theories that were developed in Europe and other Western areas were taught as dogma at South African universities. Some of them work, some of them don't work, some of them have to be modified. But the reality is that we have African phenomena to deal with. I deal with evolution, and mainly from looking at it from a bird perspective. My surname is Crowe, and I work on birds. So what I've done over my career is to take the theories largely sourced from Europe and the United States, and to a lesser extent South America, and adapted them to my work and my colleagues and students' work here on African birds and other groups. I even had a student who worked on scorpions.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're asking our viewers this morning, Professor, whether or not we should change decolonisation to Africanization, that term. What is your take on that, or do you think that there should be a crossover between the two?
I prefer the term Afro-relevance in the sense that any researcher, whether they work in the humanities, science, medicine, engineering, they're trying to address challenges, problems, ideas that are relevant to Africa. So I use the word relevance rather than centrism or Africanization, because they have those terms, I think, have a lot of baggage that I don't want to have to deal with.
Mm. But what does this term decolonising education suggest that we need to begin with in order to transform our system into a more inclusive education program?
Well, decolonization is a word that's only recently come onto the stage. Up until a few years ago, the word was transformation. And in fact, at my university, UCT, University of Cape Town, we have a deputy vice chancellor whose specific task is transformation. And transformation, of course, just means change. And of course, what we want is adaptive change to make, in my case, the University of Cape Town a better place to educate people who can deal with problems down the street, throughout the country, throughout the continent, throughout the world. But always starting with an African focus, but making sure that when and where possible, if there are universal truths to discover, we discover them here in Africa and don't wait to get word from New York or Los Angeles.
And where do we start, Professor? Do we start in primary school and take it up all the way to high school and then tertiary? Or where do we start as a whole?
I think you should start in the family, in that the parents should, as far as possible, be made aware of basic ideas. The one that I'm very, very, very familiar with is the notion of race. And in human beings, the term race is a biological term that from the 17th, 18th, 19th century was horribly misused to denigrate people that you wanted to exploit. And my personal research back in the 70s was on the helmeted guinea fowl, which is the most widespread bird in Africa. It occurs from Morocco down here to Cape Town. and I looked at races of these birds. And if you give me a bird from a bird, I can tell you, a guinea fowl, I can tell you by looking at its feathers and various other aspects of its anatomy where it comes from. So the race actually applies in guinea fowl. It absolutely never did, never will apply to human beings. We're a much more homogeneous entity, certainly biologically, and I would also argue culturally, socially, politically, and so forth. So race, I think, is a very, very important issue that needs to be dealt with so that you can move on away from self-identity politics and so forth into looking at things that we can agree on and work together on.
Now, you talk about Afro-relevance, but one observational disconnect is that minority languages are still being taught to the majority of the people in South Africa. White children can't speak African languages, or most of them as yet. Is that not perhaps also a starting point?
Oh, I think so. If I had grandchildren in this country, sadly for me, my grandkids, I even have a great-grandson, live in America because their parents choose to do so. I would insist that they learn languages. When I was a high school student, I studied Russian, for example, to get some sort of perspective on international languages. But sure, here, the problem in Southern Africa is that there are so many different languages. Even if you divide them up into groups, you have to pick carefully which one to choose to use to apply in whatever way you want.
Now, you were quite vocal during the statue debate where students vandalized Cecil John Rhodes' statues in Cape Town. What did you observe at that point in time, Professor, and what was wrong with the action at that point in time?
Oh, I think that I have no even dreams of admiring Cecil John Rhodes. He was a horrible, horrible, horrible man. And did many things that even at the time were disgraceful. What I object to was that the university administration allowed the problem to fester and fester and fester. What should have been done, to my mind, in the 1990s, they should have taken the statue and put it somewhere else on campus or consolidated it in the Rhodes Memorial, where anyone who wishes to visit it could, and take it away from campus. What I didn't like, and I still don't like, the tactics that are employed to get done what the perpetrators want done. There was no need to use human excrement on a statue, something more dignified that is respected amongst all peoples, regardless of their cultural origins, could have been done to do that. But I think really the university administration didn't miss the boat. They missed the aircraft carrier when they didn't deal with Rhodes and other Rhodes statue and other very obvious elements of the university 20 years ago.
Yes. In closing, Professor, the future of perhaps changing our education system, what you call Afro-relevance, how possible is that?
Oh, I think it's very possible. All you need to do is to identify a concept. In the case that I talked about this morning, race, for example. If intelligent people who are willing to read and talk to one another addressed it, I'm talking about not just biologists, but sociologists, historians, political scientists, the whole spectrum of humanity from a rural farmer to the president of the country could come first to see the unity of the peoples in the country, and then you progress from there. But every problem that you have to address has to be addressed with African examples and using theories and approaches that work in Africa. Virtually everything I was taught as a young man, I've abandoned and developed my own way of thinking as a consequence of spending 45 years here working on African
Yes.
birds.
Well, as the Education Department would say, African solutions for African problems. I thank you so much for your time, sir.
It's a pleasure.